Hi crew, Dr. Lewis here. We are going to work this week on meeting this standard, which is Reading Informational, 4th grade, and it's the second grouping of the Reading Informational standards. So this is an oldie but a goodie. We are coming back to this one. We worked on it at the beginning of the year, but it's a really critical standard. So you'll probably recognize everything that we're going to be talking about, which is a great thing. Our first learning target is I can determine the main idea and key supporting details of the text. The second target that we're going to meet is I can use the main idea and supporting details to summarize an informational text. I'm sure both of those look really familiar to you. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to break down this target by looking at the important vocabulary. The first vocabulary word, again, oldie but a goodie, is main idea. And I'm sure you already knew this definition, so just take a moment and read it. The main idea is what the text is mostly about. So whatever the text is that you're reading, the main idea is what's the big picture? What's it mostly about? And then of course, our supporting details are those details in the text that support or prove the main idea. They prove that the main idea is in fact the main idea because those details are all connected to it. So what we're going to be doing today, friends, is we're going to take a short piece of text, we're going to read it, and we're going to determine what's the main idea and what are the supporting details. And then we're going to review how to use that information to summarize a text. So here we go. This text that we're going to read together today is called The Wonders of Water. Now, if you want to pause this video and read it yourself before we get started, that might actually be a great idea because maybe you can already point out the main idea and the supporting details before we even go over this. So if you want to take a moment and do that now. All right. So remember, in a close read, we read not once, not twice, but we read 3 times. The first time, we just read it. The second time, we read it to get the gist, which is what the text means to me. And the third time, we read it so that we can answer questions. And in this case, the questions that we're answering are, what's the main idea? And what are the supporting details that prove that that is actually, in fact, the main idea? So let's take a moment, let's do our first read. The Wonders of Water. Water plays an important part in our lives and in our environment. It covers nearly 3/4 of the Earth's surface. It is fun to play in, but it is also needed for life. In fact, we cannot survive without water to drink. People also need water to wash, cook, and grow food. Every living thing needs water. Without it, plants and trees would not grow, aquatic life would have nowhere to live, and animals who find their food in the water would have nothing to eat. Up in Earth's atmosphere, water vapor cools and collects into clouds. When enough clusters of cloud particles stick together, they tumble back down to Earth as rain, snow, hail, or sleet. So without water, the water cycle would not work, and we would not have precipitation on Earth. Did you know that most of the world's population does not have access to clean water? We are very lucky to live in a country where clean water is available for us to drink. It is up to us to be responsible users of the water we have on Earth. Awesome. So our first read, we just read it. We're just trying to figure out, what does this text mean to me? So this next time when you're reading it, I want you to pause the video, read it yourself, and then I want you to find a sticky note or a scratch piece of paper or even in your journal if you want to. And what I want you to do is I want you to write down the gist. Now remember, a gist statement is what the text means to you. So I can't tell you what the gist is to you. I could only tell you what the gist is to me. Now I don't want to give that away. So I'm going to ask that after this second read, you pause, you write the gist, and whatever that gist is to you, we'll come back to it, and hopefully that will help us determine the main idea and supporting details. So here's our second read. As you're reading this second read and you're searching for gist, See if there's any key words that you might want to write down or record in your journal or on a sticky note or on a scratch sheet of paper. What are some words, some vocabulary words that are going to help you find this gist? Okay, so that's going to be our second read. So instead of me reading it, I want you to, on your second read, I want you to pause the video, read it yourself, and record your gist statement. Okay? All right, welcome back. So you did your first read with me. We just read it. You did your second read where you found the gist of the text, what it means to you. Now it's time for our third read. On this read, we're trying to be able to read the text to answer questions. Now remember, the questions that we had were, what is the main idea? And what are the supporting details? Now, I am positive that as you're reading this, you probably found the main idea and the supporting details, some of the supporting details on your own, and that is awesome. So what we're going to do in our third read, I am going to be underlining the main idea in red and the supporting details in orange, and perhaps they will match what you have already determined to be the main idea and the supporting details as well. So let's go ahead and get started. The wonders of water. Water plays an important part in our lives and in our environment. It covers nearly 3/4 of the Earth's surface. It is fun to play in, but it is also needed for life. In fact, we cannot survive without water to drink. People also need water to wash, cook, and grow food. Every living thing needs water. Without it, plants and trees would not grow, aquatic life would have nowhere to live, and animals who find their food in the water would have nothing to eat. Up in Earth's atmosphere, water vapor cools and collects into clouds. When enough clusters of cloud particles stick together, they tumble back down to Earth as rain, snow, hail, or sleet. So without water, the water cycle would not work, and we would not have precipitation on Earth. Did you know that most of the world's population does not have access to clean water? We're very lucky to live in a country where clean water is available for us to drink. It is up to us to be responsible users of the water we have on Earth. All right, so as I was reading it, everything in this passage was related, of course, to water. So water is the main topic. The topic of this is water. What's it about? It's about water. But we're going to narrow that down into the main idea. So a lot of times authors, when they're writing informational texts, they'll put the most important sentence in the very beginning. Maybe it's the first or second sentences. Maybe it's in the first paragraph. In this case, our passage is only one paragraph. And so we have to think, what was all of this stuff all about? I'm noticing details like, yeah, it's fun to play in it. But here's another one. But it is also needed for life. In fact, we cannot survive without water to drink. Every living thing needs water. This tells me that the main idea is right here. Water plays an important part in our lives and in our environment. Now, if that is true, if that really is the main idea, I'm going to label this MI for main idea, and I'm going to put my red marker away because this text really only has one idea, main idea, because the topic is about water. And the main idea is water plays an important part in our lives and in our environment. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to look with my orange marker for at least 3 supporting details, and I'm going to put the number 3 in parentheses here because that's like our magic number for when we're writing summaries or when we're making sure that this really is the main idea. If we can't find at least 3 of these in a paragraph, that's probably not the main idea because details support what the text is mostly about. So let's look for pieces of information in the text that show that water plays an important part in our lives and in our environment. I bet that if you pause the video right now, you can find at least 3 details that prove that water plays an important part in our lives and our environment. Why don't you try that? All right, welcome back. So I think it's pretty simple when we look at it here. It says it covers nearly 3/4 of the Earth's surface. Yeah, that's really important, but does that tell us why it's an important part in our lives? Not quite. So it's not a bad detail, it's just not the most supportive detail for our main idea. Now, it's fun to play in, but it is also needed for life. Now, as much as I like this detail, it kind of has two parts to it. It's fun to play in, which does that support how it's an important part in our lives and our environment? If you're like me and you love fun, you might say yes, but because it's got these two parts, I'm going to say this is not the most important detail. But look at this next sentence. In fact, we cannot survive without water to drink. That word survive is a key critical detail. That word survive means you live or you die. And so we cannot survive. We cannot live without water to drink. I would say that's a pretty important part of our life. So that's going to be our first supporting detail that I would say is the most supportive. It helps prove that our main idea is, in fact, our main idea. People also need water to wash, cook, and grow food. Again, really, really important, but I wonder if it's the most important. But let's check out this next one. Every living thing needs water. Does that support that it's an important part in our lives and our environment? Yeah, I would say yes. All right. Without it, plants and trees would not grow, aquatic life would have nowhere to live, and animals who find their food in the water would have nothing to eat. Now that whole compound sentence, that whole large sentence, I would say that whole thing is an excellent, excellent detail. Without it, plants and trees would not grow, aquatic life would have nowhere to live, and animals who find their food in the water would have nothing to eat. That detail right there, as long as it is, very supportive to our main idea because these trees, this aquatic life, these animals, they're a part of our environment and a part of our lives. And if they didn't have water, they wouldn't be around. Really, really important detail. So yes, we've already found 3, but I wonder, remember it's at least 3, I wonder if maybe we can find 1 or 2 more. So let's look at the next one. Up in Earth's atmosphere, water vapor cools and collects into clouds. Does that sentence tell us that it plays an important part in our lives and our environment? Well, not by itself. That's just a little piece of information to kind of set us up for the next part. When enough clusters of cloud particles stick together, they tumble back down to Earth as rain, snow, hail, or sleet. What about that one? Does that tell us that water plays an important part in our lives and our environment? I feel like it's getting there, but it's not quite as supportive as we're looking for. So let's look at the next one. So, without water, the water cycle would not work, and we would not have precipitation on Earth. Does that tell us that it plays an important part in our lives and our environment? It sure does, because without that water cycle, it says right here, we would not have precipitation on Earth. And without that precipitation on Earth, guess what we wouldn't have? That's right, water. All right, so I'm going to give you another little helpful hint. When you see phrases like, did you know? That's coming up and showing you that here's a really interesting fact. Now, something to remember when you're reading informational text, those interesting facts, those interesting tidbits aren't always supporting details. They're things that have been added in to make the writing more interesting. So let's just double check and make sure that this is used to make the writing more interesting and not a supporting detail that we would want to add to our summary. So, did you know that most of the world's population does not have access to clean water? Does that tell us that it plays an important part in our lives and our environment? It doesn't. It's just a really interesting fact that's good to know. Look at this next sentence. We are very lucky to live in a country where clean water is available for us to drink. Does that tell us that water plays an important part in our lives and in our environment? You know, it doesn't. Again, it's just another really interesting sentence to kind of beef up the writing. the author is trying to tell us kind of how he or she feels about living in America. But again, what if you don't live in America and you're reading this article? Does that support our main idea? It sure doesn't. And then the last one, it is up to us to be responsible users of the water we have on earth. Now, as much as I believe that that sentence is true, does that support our main idea? Water plays an important part in our lives and our environment. It doesn't. It's telling us that because water plays an important part in our lives and our environment, it's up to us to be responsible users of the water we have on earth. So it doesn't support the main idea as a detail, but it does give some really great information from the author, his or herself's opinion. So I think that that is not something that we would underline as a supporting detail. So you've got your main idea. You've got at least three. I think we have four. 1, 2, 3. We have 4 supporting details. Look at us go. That all support that main idea. So your next task, friends, will be to meet our second target. Because did we meet our first target? I can determine the main idea and the key supporting details of a text. We sure did. Nailed it. So now we've got to summarize it. And remember, a summary has some really important pieces that you don't need to forget. So what I'm going to come down here, and the first thing that we do for our summary is we write our title in the beginning. So I'm going to use quotation marks because this is just a brief piece of an article. So there's our title, The Wonders of Water. Now, if we had an author listed here, we would say by the author, but we don't have an author listed, so we're going to leave that part off. So The Wonders of Water, and here's that key critical sentence. In fact, it's so important, I'm going to write it in green. Is mostly about. And I bet you saw that coming, didn't you? Now, what is The Wonders of Water mostly about? We go right back up to our main idea. So it's about how water plays an important part in our lives and in our environment. So the first part of our summary, we've written the title, we've written is mostly about, and we've written the main idea. So the next part of our summary is to show how we know, to prove it. And remember that sentence that we always use, that sentence starter that helps us get those details out. I know this because, and I bet you know what's coming, the text says, and this is where we include some supporting details from our text. Now, a summary is supposed to be short. If your summary is longer than the article, it is no longer a summary, it is turning into an essay. So what I want us to do is I want us to pick out only two of the most supportive details. Now, our summary set us up for this. Our summary says it is an important part in our, I'm going to use red. It is an important part in our lives and in our environment. So if we're going to write a really amazing summary, we're going to include a detail about how it's important to our lives and about how it's important to the environment. So going back to your details right here, remember we want to also keep it short and sweet. We also don't have to copy exactly what the words say. we can paraphrase or write in our own words using these to help us. I think I found a really great supporting detail about how it is important to our lives. Look right here. We cannot survive without water to drink. So I'm going to write down, I know this because the text says, we cannot survive without water. Now I'm going to leave off the part that says to drink because it's a perfectly fine detail all on its own. I know this because the text says we cannot survive without water. That tells us how it plays an important part in our lives. Boom. I'm going to come up with my next detail from the text, and I'm going to set it up with that next sentence starter. The text also says, remember, and I don't have to copy directly from the text. You can. In 5th grade, remember, you're going to have to, but in 4th grade, it's okay if we write it sort of in our own words, as long as we're getting it from the text. So now we're looking for how it plays an important part in our environment. So check out this and see if you can find a detail about how it's important in our environment. There are several that we can choose from. I like this one. Without it, plants and trees would not grow. That's a pretty awesome one to choose from. So I'm going to say the text also says, without it, and I'm going to kind of make it in my own words. Without it, plants and trees can't grow. Friends, we have just found a detail to support that how water plays an important part in our lives. We can't survive without it. And our environment, plants and trees can't grow. This summary is looking so good. So I'm thinking, there's my dog. So I'm thinking that this summary is really good. Is it short? Yep. Does it have the main idea? Yep. Does it have 2 supporting details? Yep. So I'm thinking that this summary is absolutely stellar, ready to go. So this week, when you are working on this skill, you are going to be reading a text, determining the main idea and the key supporting details. You're going to use those key supporting details and the main idea to write a summary of the informational text. You can come back to this video to see how we did that. Remember the main idea, what the text is mostly about. The supporting details are details in the text that support or prove that the main idea is in fact the main idea. And then you're going to use that to write your summary. Don't forget about your sentence starters, because if we just had the words in blue, the wonders of water, how water plays an important part in our lives and our environment. We cannot survive without water. Without it, plants and trees cannot grow. It's got the information, but it doesn't quite sound like a summary. So the words is mostly about, I know this because the text says, the text also says, those are critical pieces of your summary as well. Friends, you're going to do an excellent job this week on your meeting this standard, reading informational 4th grade 2nd standard, working on these targets. At the end of the week, you are going to have an article very similar to this one. And your job is going to be to write the main idea, to write the supporting details, and to write a summary. Notice how short mine is. I want yours to be just as short and sweet and to the point. That's what a summary does. So, best of luck to you, friends. I will post a second video so that you can watch it tomorrow with your second article. I'm going to use a different passage so that you can be as prepared as possible for your exit ticket on Friday. All right, friends, I love you and I miss you. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.